the job interview. Put in the chat if you have an interview scheduled. Just say yes. Put in the chat if you have an interview scheduled. Cool. Quite a few. Awesome. And also put in the chat if you've had past interviews, and you can put in a number. How many interviews have you already participated in? 1, 2, 5, 20. Wow. Quite a range. Cool. So before we start talking about the job interview, I want everybody who has an interview scheduled or had one to celebrate, to pat yourself on your back, to congratulate your resume, because your resume did the job of the resume. It got you the interview, and you got an interview. So that is totally worth celebrating, even if that interview did not move on to a job. It's an event to celebrate. Personally, I would buy some really high quality dark chocolate, but everybody celebrates differently. But so what we're going to do today is we're going to review the steps that you need to take for your job interview. How do you prepare for it? What are the different types? How do you communicate the best image? What are some key interview questions? How to handle difficult questions. And on that end, we're going to talk about STAR method. And what are post-interview steps? For those of you who have had interviews already, how many sent a thank you note? Just say yes or no in the chat. How many sent out thank you notes? Awesome. Awesome. And you did that without us telling you to do that. That's so cool. All righty. So as you know, and as people who've had interviews know, that the interview is actually just one part of the whole interview process. What you do before and after the interview is just as important as what you do in the interview. And one of the first things that you need to do is you need to prepare. You need to know quite a bit of information, or at least gleaned it before you go in there, right? You need to research the job. And that's by rereading the posting, right? Or going to Career One Stop and looking up that job on that website, and they'll tell you salary ranges by location. They'll tell you specific skills that are important for that position, different names that particular position have. So Career One Stop is a good place to research the job. The employer can be researched on LinkedIn, Glass Ceiling, or on the company website, right? The object of one of the objects of researching is not to ask a question that you could have found out by yourself. The amount of time you have talking to people in an interview is precious, and you don't want to waste it by talking about things that you could have found out other ways. It's also a good way to be able to answer questions, because if you know the mission, you know the goals, you know some of the activity of the company, when they ask you a specific question, you can relate it back to them. And you can only do that if you know about the company, right? Knowing the skills they need, you get that off of the job posting. And then you need to check your attitude. You need to approach every interview as if it's the only interview you're ever going to have, and you know for certain when you're done talking, they're going to give you a job. You have to approach it with a really, really positive attitude, and you have to be prepared. how many of you out there have had jobs where you've worked with somebody who's just not a positive human being? Yes or no in the chat. How many of you worked with a coworker or a manager, right? And have you enjoyed that experience working with somebody who wasn't positive? Right. So you have to imagine that when people are interviewing you, they already think that you can do the job. Otherwise, you wouldn't have gotten the interview, right? Your resume cover letter sold you. So now you need to sell yourself. You need to show them how you can be a contributing, positive team member and employee. And nobody wants to hire someone who's negative, right? So you need to check your attitude. You also want to come across that you have energy. And this is really important. Unfortunately, more important for us over a certain age. And because one of the feedbacks that I've heard from employers and HR people is that I just interviewed somebody, they were qualified, they came across as a really wonderful person. We believed that they could have contributed to the team, but we were curious about their energy level. We didn't know if they had energy enough for the job. And you can show energy by the same way you show passion, right? Your excitement to do the work that needs to be done. And you need to look good. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. But I cannot overemphasize the importance of research. And that research should include reading over your resume, because if you're doing what the Career Force Center advises, you tweak your resume a little bit for each job application. And you do not ever want to contradict something that's on your resume or your cover letter in the interview process, right? So you want to make sure. And it's also really good to research, if possible, if you know the names of the people that are going to be interviewing you, and you can do that easily through LinkedIn. A fun thing to do is also to check out the company website. Sometimes they tell you about staff, or to Google the name and see what comes up. You never know. Are there questions, Jack?
No, I
Okay.
just got one that said, where can you research companies besides their website? And so you had just mentioned LinkedIn.
Yep. And Glass Ceiling or Glassdoor. It's called Glassdoor. I'm sorry. It's called Glassdoor. You need to be careful when you're interviewing on researching on Glassdoor, because people put in comments about the company, and we all know. Oh, someone just said Crunchbase. I wonder what that is. That people complain easier than they say good things. So that's an important thing to keep in mind when you're looking at those things. All right, so what are the different types of interviews? The phone screening is usually done by HR. It is totally acceptable and advised that you schedule a phone screening. Many years ago, I got somebody who called and asked if I was available for a phone screening for a job that I had applied for in August, and the call happened in October. There was no way that I would be able to manufacture in my head anything about that job. So even in 2 days after applying for a job, if you get a phone screening interview, it's really okay to say, this is not a good time. Can we schedule it? And some of the reasons for doing that would be, are you in a place that you can answer the questions, even if it's 5 minutes, uninterrupted? Your kids won't come in, partner or spouse won't come in, the dog won't be barking, your neighbor isn't mowing their lawn. It's okay to say this is not a good time because you want to be able to control those things. You also want to have the job posting in front of you, your resume and cover letter. You want to look at or review any research that you did about the company before you applied. And if you haven't had a lot of research done, you want to be able to do that before the phone screening. So they might sound like there's a sense of urgency. They can always reschedule. And then you need to control your environment. And I also suggest, like, I never do a phone screening unless I'm dressed the same way I would be if I went in for the interview. And I need to check my attitude, right? I need to make sure that I'm positive, upbeat, smiling. And so those are usually interviews that are done by HR, and it's really okay to do them, to schedule them. The in-person screening or the selection interviews, about 90 to 95% of the first interview is done virtually. So that's very similar to the same format as this workshop. It could be Zoom, it could be Teams, it could be Google Meetup, it could be other things. So that's because of COVID, that's where a lot of companies have rested. It saves time and money with at least the first interview. You want to make sure that, again, you're dressed completely as if you're going to be going in for an interview. You don't want to have to accidentally stand up and have your workout shorts on. You want to have a totally be dressed like you would be if you were going in. You want to control your background because a lot of communication, a lot of interpretation of who we are is visual. People believe nonverbal communication much more than they do verbal. So you want a plain background. You do not want anything in there that would cause people to judge you because you don't know people's views on religion, on politics, on all kinds of things you don't know. And it might be an unconscious reflex in them, but you don't want to give them that option. So the plainer the background behind you, the better. And again, just like the phone screening interview, you want to control for noises, pets, children, companions, outside noises. Once I had an interview where I live in a townhouse association and the landscaping crew was out leaf blowing in right by my window. There was nothing I could do about it. So I moved the interview into one of my bathrooms, clean and stood against the wall. It was a clean wall, just so it would be quiet. Or you can just say, I'm explain the noise so people know that you don't have control over it. And before any virtual meeting, you want to check your technology. You want to make sure that your audio is good. You want to make sure that the video is good. You want to make sure that you have bandwidth with your internet for both. If there's any issue that you think that you can't, then I would check out your local libraries. I know at least in the Twin City metro area, most libraries have study rooms that you can reserve for free and you can use their internet. Here at the North and the South Career Force, we have rooms that you can go into and use our internet. You want to check that ahead of time.
Hey, Sandra, I'd like to pop in real quick if you don't mind.
Oh, please.
So I apologize if I mispronounce this. It's Keman. He has a job interview that's over the phone tomorrow, and he'd like a little bit of coaching on that. It's a phone screening. Can you give some thoughts there?
Right. So again, you should review everything that you sent to the company, your resume and your cover letter. You should review the job posting. And we'll talk about things for interviews in general about how to answer questions a little bit later, so that will apply. I suggest dressing up. I suggest smiling while you're talking. And definitely, just as we talked about, try to control any background noise that you have. And you want to make sure, this is probably obvious, that your phone bill is paid and your phone is charged. Because there's nothing worse than being in the middle of a phone screening and have your cell phone die because you didn't charge it. So hopefully let me know if you need a little bit more. We're going to talk about questions and answers in just a bit. So if that isn't helpful, then you can ask more questions. Okay. Was there any response that we need to immediately respond to, Jack?
No, they have said thank you. We do have another question, but that can wait till later. We're
Okay.
doing great.
Cool. So in-person selection, the in-person screening is usually the first interview. Selection interviews can be 2, 3, or 4. The other day I talked to someone who said she had her 5th interview scheduled for a particular job that she was applying for. Her first interview was with a panel. She had 3 interviews with other people within the business. Her 4th or 5th interview is going to be with her immediate supervisor. So there can be multiple interviews, and everything that we're saying can be applied to all of those. A behavior interview is where they ask you specific questions, and that can happen in any of the interviews to get to how you would react in situations. So you need to always remember in the back of your mind during an interview that you already qualify for the job. You have the skills that it takes. You just have to show how you would apply those skills to their problems, their projects, and how you would fit into a team. A work sample is, the most obvious. If you're a welder, they might have you come in and do a weld. If I was applying for a training job, they might have me come in and lead a workshop. So those are interviews where you're actually doing for them what they would like you to do. I've heard a lot of people who are working, applying for accountant jobs, that they'll be given. So a 30-minute phone screening is just like an in-person selection meeting. So that's a little bit more than a screening interview. For the work sample, they want to see how you do. And I've heard project managers be given a project that they have to scope out and say how they would organize it to get started. So they're looking to see your skills in action that are required for the job. A group or a peer interview. Sometimes companies bring in multiple candidates for the same position and interview them together. A peer interview would be like going out for lunch with people that you would be working with. You have to remember all your interactions with anybody at all, including the parking lot attendant, the receptionist, all those people, any people associated in any way, shape, or form with the company, it's all part of your interview. One of my colleagues shared a story where she was interviewing in another job she had for a position, and they interviewed a gentleman who was perfect, awesome. They really thought that he would be a great team member. He had all the skills. He answered all the questions appropriately, but she never hired anybody without checking out with the receptionist, because they intentionally have people sit for 5 or so minutes in the waiting area. And the receptionist was totally turned off by the guy because he was on his cell phone the whole time, and he was talking loudly and yelling at whoever was on the phone. It might be appropriate, but you never do that kind of thing in public. And the best advice you could probably get for this workshop is that you leave your phone in the car. You take off your watch I don't know if some of you have watches that are tied in with your phone, and when you get a text or an email, it buzzes. And I've become quite Pavlovian. Every time my wrist buzzes, I check. And that's not what you want to be doing during an interview. Now, there are probably circumstances where you need to leave your phone with you. Right. Also, do not wear any fragrance. And we'll talk about that with the best image. But thank you for bringing that up. So, yeah, I would never, ever talk on my phone during any part of my interview, including waiting, because that's also part of your interview. All right, you've done all your research. You know about the company, you've reviewed the position, you've reviewed your resume and your cover letter, you've put out your outfit. And so now you want to make your best impression, right? You want to communicate your best image. And one of the things I do is that I lay out 2 outfits the night before, because you never know exactly how you're going to feel. And I might not wear one of those outfits, but at least that part of the decision making, the thought process, taking up energy in my brain is somewhat taken care of. So you've got your outfit, you have your energy and your attitude. And as somebody mentioned in the chat, you do not want to wear anything with fragrances. You don't know if people are allergic or they have some kind of negative memory about a smell. And a lovely story, I did this workshop multiple times with another individual, and he worked for the state higher ed. He worked at Mankato State, and they were interviewing somebody for a position, and the woman came in with perfume on that smelled like roses. And it was real rose scent, and he was highly allergic to roses. She had no way of knowing that. He spent the whole interview trying not to sneeze on her, dealing with his adverse reaction to her smell. Needless to say, he does not remember or did not remember much about her and her interview, other than that she smelled like roses, right? So you want to be careful with your scents. And you want to remember, so sending good signals. Remember that 80% or better of your communication is nonverbal. So you want to sit up straight. You want to smile. You want to make sure that no part of your hair is kind of flying up over your head. And then there's a talk, if it's a virtual interview, I recommend not showing up more than 5 minutes ahead of time. And there are some different opinions on that. Some people say 15. The reason to show up sooner would be to check your technology, which I recommend you do ahead of time. A lot of times companies do virtual interviews back to back to back to back. So the interview is usually 45 to 50 minutes, and then that gives them 10 minutes to chat about the candidate, and then 5 minutes to get you on. So, but also for an in-person, I would show up no more than 10 to 15 minutes ahead of time. If you're there early because you're worried about traffic, I would walk around the block, check out the art in the building before you actually go into the area where you need to report for the interview. And one of the suggestions is to avoid being creepy or weird, which is very subjective. There's Michael Kiefer wrote a book called Mind Power, Power Mind System. So you might want to check that out. You do want to be yourself, but you want to be your best self. Show and share, show and tell or show and share is all about your answering questions. You want to answer the questions showing how you can do the job. you want to finish strong by asking questions at the end and being proactive, and you always want to follow up. So how do you handle tough questions? For those of you who have had interviews, Murphy's Law, yeah. For those of you who have had interviews, what are some of the toughest questions that you've received, that you've been asked? Put them in the chat. What are some tough questions?
It's a pretty quiet group today, Sandra.
Yeah. Nobody got a tough question? Weakness, yeah. Any others? Nobody else got tough question? Nobody got asked if they were to be a tree, what tree would they be? Here we go. Okay. Tell me about a time when, yeah.
I think that how do you handle conflict with a coworker? I think that's a big question.
It is. It is. Bottom line, absolutely rock bottom line, and a line you should never, ever, ever cross is you should never be negative. Never be negative about a company, a manager, or a coworker. Even if your manager was a super micromanager and your coworkers threw you in under the bus and the company's package for when you left sucked, you do not convey any of that information or any of that energy ever, ever in an interview. If you're going to talk bad about someone from your past, what's going to stop you from talking about someone in your future? You're going to badmouth a manager and your future manager is interviewing you. How can they trust you, right? You always coach things in a way that it sounds like a challenge, right? Sounds like a challenge, and that you've learned from it and you work through things together, even when you really don't feel that you did. But bottom line, and please think of it as being zapped. If you cross it, don't ever be negative. One way of handling tough questions is the sandwich method. And being said about being negative, you always want to be direct and honest, and you don't want to lie. And if the situation allows, you can always ask questions in return. And you should always, so I took media training many, many years ago. And the big thing about the training was I was being trained to sell a certain product, was no matter what the question is, you turn it back to the product. So I was being taught how to sell a product that was invented by women by Quaker Oats. And so even if somebody asked me what the weather was like in an interview, I needed to be able to turn that back to the product. So if someone said, "How is the weather?" I would say, "It's really sunny. It's a great day to sit on your porch and cook up this meal in your microwave, and it will give you even more time to enjoy the sunshine." So every answer that you have to a question needs to respond back to the job, back to the skills that they're looking for that are talked about in the job posting, back to the company's mission and goals, back to whatever else you've learned about the company. The answers that you give are not about you. The answers need to be about them, right?
I was going to,
this,
oh, I'm sorry. I was going to jump
no,
in and say at the beginning, whenever an employer says, "Oh, tell us a little bit about yourself,"
yeah,
that's not about, "Oh, I like to go to the beach and I walk my dog." That's showing your transferable skills about who you are in your past to be able to do the job that you're applying for.
correct. So if I was asked that question and I was applying for a trainer job, I would say I have 10 plus years of experience working with many different groups of subject matter experts, presenting many different subjects to many different audiences. And I'm very passionate about having learning conversations with with a large variety of people. If I give a presentation and I don't learn something, then I don't feel like I've succeeded, and that's what my goal is. So yeah, and those are questions that you can practice, and even if they don't happen, the practice is still good because you've thought through more about how you would fit into the role. The sandwich method is about positive, negative, positive. So we tend to remember the first thing that was said and the last thing that was said. And that's where you put your most energy and time. And then the negative thing is just think of it as just, so if you're a person, when I do a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, I put peanut butter on both pieces of bread and the jelly in the middle so it doesn't make the bread soggy. So think of the negative as that little strip of jelly that's in between the two pieces of bread with peanut butter. So if somebody asked me about a weakness, I would say, one way I would answer that question is, I'm a lifelong learner. I love learning new stuff. I love applying. I love doing new things so I can learn from them. In the past, I have been not necessarily able to get projects done beforehand, or I'm right up against the deadline or a little bit over. And what I learned from teaching this assessment called True Colors is that I'm a green. And being a green means that I'm into learning. And what I've realized, what I do for projects is oh, one more interview, one more book, one more test, one more, let's collect more information. And then all of a sudden I'm up against the deadline. So now going forward, since I've learned that, I have two deadlines. I have a deadline that I stop getting in new information. It doesn't mean that I won't take anything in that comes my way. I'm just not actively looking for it. And then I have the actual deadline. So that way, for the last 5 or 6 years, I've been able to finish projects either before or on the deadline. So I started with a positive, I love learning, said that sometimes I was up against project deadlines, and now I always make my deadline. And we will be sending you a list of questions. So that's one way to anticipate questions. Another way to anticipate questions is to use artificial intelligence. ChatGPT, or there are quite a few others out there that some of you might know about. If you put in the job posting and you ask, what questions would someone be asked in an interview for this job? And you'll get questions. One of my sister-in-laws did that. She got 10 questions that were generated. They asked 7 of those questions almost verbatim. So companies are also using ChatGPT. And then GPT learns as you go along. So after you ask it the initial question about what questions would be asked, you can put in your resume and you could say, what questions would be asked? Would there be more defined questions asked given this is my resume? And see what happens. And even if they never ask some of those questions or any of them, they might be questions that you might not have thought about or anticipated. There are also lists of questions online, and we will supply. And be prepared, right? And that means not only thinking about the questions in your head and your answers, but saying them out loud, because then you get the rhythm of your voice. You say words that might be hard to say or you're not used to saying or might be new. You could even practice interview with somebody at a career force center, or with a friend. It might not be a good idea to do it with a partner. They might have too much invested in your interview. but that all depends on your relationship with your loved ones. It's always good to talk the answers out loud. And again, just what we said earlier, be positive, be honest, and keep it brief, right? Do the KISS system, right? Keep it simple, sister. Keep it simple. The shorter, the better. You have only so many minutes, and it's many places let you know the total number of questions you'll be asked. So you are in charge of managing that time. And so you want to keep it brief and focus on the skills. You are letting them know that you are the right person to do this job because you have these skills and these attitudes about your work. Jack, how are we doing about questions?
Well, folks are pretty quiet. I will mention earlier someone said, has anyone noticed the new trend of companies slash organizations not giving the interviewer's name?
The name of people who are are doing the interview?
Yes.
Wow. That's very interesting. Yeah, I've not heard of that before. Have you? Okay. I do know that there are interviews that are totally virtual with nobody there. So that you're sent the questions ahead of time. You're sent a link. You're told you have so many minutes to answer X amount of questions, and you sit in front of your screen and you answer the questions. Question 1 is, and then your answer. Question 2 is, and your answer. And then people review the videos afterwards. So totally weird.
I had my mute on earlier when you asked me that question. I'm sorry. Also, someone said, how much time should you limit your responses to?
Right, so that has all to do with how much time is the interview and how many questions are, right? If the interview is an hour and you have 3 questions, and it's set up to the fact that you can ask questions after you've responded to a question, then that's more of a conversational interview. If it's 45 minutes and there's 9 questions, that's a pretty short amount of time.
So we have Danny who said, are recruiters being outsourced for interviewing now?
Probably everything is being outsourced.
It is. And I'll tell you, I've had interviews where the recruiter or HR person did not even know about the job that they were filling. The questions when I asked them and I was trying to get more information, they couldn't even tell me about it. So sometimes that's a concern because you wonder the person that's filtering out whether or not you should pass on to the manager doesn't even know the role. So that's something to be aware of, to really read the job description, to be able to make sure that your skills transfer into that and to articulate it.
Yep. And this sandwich method is a really good way to tell me about your worst boss. Nobody has had a worse boss. People have had a boss that has, sometimes there's tension, or you have a joint challenge that you have a different opinion about, right? One of the questions is maybe if you, in a brick wall, what brick would you be? Or tell me about a time you failed. So you never want to use that word fail. You want a word challenge, would be a better word, but fail has a negative. So even if you're asked the question directly, tell me about a time you failed, I wouldn't say I failed at doing this. I would never use that word in my answer. So the STAR method, which is a really great method, and it's a great way to be succinct, and a great way to organize time, especially if you have a little bit about time. And one of the great things about the STAR method is essentially you're telling a story, and our brain is hardwired to remember stories. And so this will make you more memorable in the people after the interview, right? So if you say, tell me a time when you were given a project and not enough resources, right? So you would want to say, what is the situation? So what was the project and what were the resources you were given? What was the task what was the task you were asked to complete? That should be a very short part of your story. You want to focus on what were your actions? What did you do within this situation given the task that was required? And the most time on the results. Just like on your resume, you should have accomplishment statements, not task statements. When you're answering these questions, you want to say what the results were. What actually happened.
So there were a couple of additional questions. So George asked about a way to do mock interviews at a Career Force Center. So I did attach the locations, the
Great.
Career Force locations, and I'll send that in an email. And then I also attached the Career Force events. Do you want to share a little bit about that, Sandra?
You mean like the job fairs? Is that what you're talking about?
So if they go to careerforcemn.com/events, they can type in like a job search or resumes, and they can sign up for online or over the phone sessions like one-on-one.
Right. So yeah, many Career Force offices have one-on-ones that you can schedule. The Career Force offices in North and South Minneapolis, you need to call the front desk of each of those locations, and then they will have somebody call you to schedule a one-on-one. We don't have those online, mostly because we have a larger walk-in traffic. You're also welcome to come in to at least North and South. I'm not sure what the hours or how it's dealt with at other places. The Career Force offices are an incredible resource that you can access in person, on the phone, or virtually. We have all that technology available to us, and it's really a great resource. It's the best resource if we look at questions. So what are some questions you might ask? You might be asked why you quit your last job or why you are no longer at your last company. And that's a very personal answer. It might be because you were asked to leave. It might be because of reorganization. It might be because somebody retired. Who knows, right? But if you have any at all negative feeling connected to how you would answer that question, you need to talk it out with somebody at a Career Force because they have tools that can help you work through that, right? And again, going back to your energy, your attitude, you don't want to convey the grudge that you might have with a former employer or the sadness that you have from no longer having a job that you had for 30 years. Those are things that you need to leave out of whatever interview you have going forward, and people can help you. And it's really good to connect with another human being. Jack?
What about dealing with anxiety or nervousness during an interview?
Yeah, and we all have it. So, one of the things that I do note for myself is if I don't have a certain amount of anxiety about something I'm going to do, then I might not be doing a good job because I'm not worried about it and I'm not internalizing the importance. And then over and above that, if you're super anxious, you probably know of ways that you set yourself up for success. So if you're really worried about not being able to answer questions, get multiple lists of questions, use ChatGPT, write out the answers, read those answers out loud, work with somebody else to answer them. The more you practice, the more you internalize the information. I keep thinking about the first Karate Kid movie with Ralph somebody. His teacher had him do wax on in one direction with one hand and wax off with the other hand in the other direction. And the reason for them doing that was because they wanted the student to internalize. They want it to be muscle memory. The more you talk about yourself, the more that you're able to say, this is what I can do. This is where I used it. These are examples of the results. The more muscle memory, the more internalized it is, and the easier it is to come out. Also, deep breathing exercises are really great. I've started meditating about 5 years ago, and I personally have found that to be a somewhat, it sounds very kumbaya, life-changing. And there are multiple times in my day sometimes that I'll say, pause, slow down, breathe. And it's okay in an interview not to answer the absolute millisecond that they stop talking. It's okay to have that pause. The pause is probably going to be a lot shorter than you feel it is. It's okay to pause. If you need to create a pause, it's also really good to repeat back the question in your own words to clarify. That little bit of time will help your mind start thinking about the question.
We had oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. Go on.
We had another question asking about um, what do you do when you're interviewing and you can't hide your age? For those of us that are more seasoned.
Right. Um, and I understand and relate to that question. I had been laid off because of reorganizations or retirement of employers 3 times between 2009 and 2019. So 3 times I had to start the interview process. The first 2 times, I actually dyed my hair. It wasn't quite this white, but I dyed my hair. The second time, I didn't. And I decided that this is who I was, and I had energy, and I had skills, and I had passion. And so that's what I conveyed in the interview. Like we mentioned earlier, sometimes the criticism about old people, seasoned people, is that they don't have energy. And so I make sure that I project energy and passion. Another criticism is that we're set in our ways and we're going to not learn or be willing to do things a different way. I always try to interject the fact that I'm always learning. I'm always willing to try new things. And another way to handle this, and I've not tried this, but I know someone who has. My brother was laid off from a job at 60 due to reorganization. He had gone into the Navy with the thought of going on and getting his college degree, but that's not what worked out. He had the equivalent of what would be a master's in engineering in experience, but he didn't have an undergraduate degree. So he had his age and that lack of a diploma. And he decided to, somewhere in the interview, sometimes at the beginning, to say, I just want to talk about the age question up front. I know that you can't ask me my age. It's obvious that I am of a certain age. And I just want you to know that I have passion and energy for this profession. And I have I'm not planning on retiring within the next 5 years or so. So I want to get that out front. That's not comfortable or suggested for everyone, but that's another way of dealing with that issue. Um, so those are just suggestions. Um, and again, we are who we are, and we are the age that we are. And we bring a lot of experience and knowledge, not only of our area of expertise, but of working with people and how to show up in the workplace and how to deal with the soft skills. And so that would be also an opportunity to highlight your soft skills, because, you've seen a lot, you've done a lot. Jack, do you have something to add?
So I was going to mention that when people ask me about, when they say, what do I do when someone says, what are your long-term goals? Honestly, I would just tell people, you can say, you can say, I have specific financial goals. I'm looking to be in the workforce for several years. I have a lot to offer. And you can tell them, I am punctual. I'm not on my phone. I problem solve. I'm analytical. I want to learn and grow and contribute and take everyone's ideas and help you be the best you can be with your organization. But I have financial goals. I'm looking to be here. And you don't have to give a number. You don't have to say anything, but I mean, just tell them you have financial goals and then spin it into a positive about what your transferable skills are.
Right.
And then just
And,
leave it there. Yeah.
and relate it all back to the
The
posting,
job.
right? So I
Yes.
have these skills. You are asking for these skills. I can do these skills. Here are some examples of how I do them and the results. It's always good to focus on the results. We only have about 5 minutes left. We did already address why did you leave your last job? And we do not have time to handle that here. And it really is a personal thing, a personal question, a personal answer, and it's also a personal attitude. And those are dealt with specifically with the people at Career Forces that are trained and can help you. All right, we have a little bit of time to do post-interview steps. You have to contact your references. References are no longer on your resume. They might ask you for your references. Never give anybody any references that you haven't pre-asked ahead of time, if they'll do that. And always make sure that your references are relative to the job that you're applying for. If I apply for a training job, I would give references of people who know about my experience leading workshops and developing content. I also have other parts of my life. I'm an artist and I do art shows, but I wouldn't give somebody the reference of someone who's done art shows with me if I was looking at a training job. If I was doing a sales job, that might be the reference. After the interview, if references have been asked for, contact your references in an email. Send them your resume that you used, the cover letter that you used, and the job posting. Also, in the body of the email, thank them for being a reference and recap the interview. What were some of the questions that were asked so they know what areas of your experience that they'll need to highlight and discuss? Always, 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 always send a thank you note. And there's debate whether it should be email or a letter or a card. And you can do more than one, right? Immediately within the first 24 hours, you could send an email. If you do not have contact information for everyone that was there, you send it to the person who's contacted you about the interview. And you can say, please share my thoughts with the others. And then you can also send a card, a note card. And one of the things that if you have an address and you can send a card, send a pretty card, an interesting photo, a quote, something, because people tend to post those objects in their office. And then it's a reminder of you. It's a visual reminder of you and their conversation with you. All right, we only have a little bit of time left. I want to be able to handle any lingering questions?
So we have, so George mentioned, how about, let me do this here. Boop. Okay, we're all here. How about the question of why you are looking for a job and why you want to work there?
Why you want to work there should be related back to the mission statement, back to the job posting, back to all your research, right? A colleague told a story how she applied for a job and she was asked that, why do you want to work here? She related back to the mission statement, saying how that really spoke to her, that that was part of her core being, and that she wanted to work for a company that had that as a mission statement. It just so happened that one of the people on the panel said, "Wow, I didn't even know that was part of our mission statement. That is really great." So that's goes way back to what we talked about earlier, that research, research, research.
Let's see.
Yeah, LinkedIn is a good place to get people's full name.
Well, and honestly, I would go to LinkedIn, look up the different companies that I'm interested in working for. You can go look at their people that work for those companies. Go and look at their own job history. What type of education and certifications do they have? Who have they worked for? Who do they know? And sometimes I've even called a phone tree. I've called and I've found people that work for the company and I've said, hey, unconventional, I'm calling, but I really want to work for you. Do you have a couple of minutes? If someone says no, okay, fine. There's another person you can call. And then what if you were calling in and the person who had the job before you had no initiative? They didn't get things done. They're going to go, ooh, Jack called me. Jack reached out. Jack's going to get it done. So I mean, you need to be more than a piece of paper. Try to really, introduce yourself.
Right. We're three-dimensional, we're not two-dimensional.
Oh, that's good, Sandra.
Anything out there. It's already 11. We can go a little over. If anybody has any questions, please check out your career force office near you, and please go to careerforcemn.com and check out all the great information. It's a very deep website. You can even find job fairs there all over the state. You can find networking groups. Please visit us. We're people. We love to see you. Have a great day.